Well, hello and welcome to CMB's June webinar. My name is John Wood. If we haven't had a chance to meet, I'm the Communications and Member Services Manager for CMB. Really excited to dive into today's topic. And as you probably see on your screen, we're going to look at how do you take that audience that you're serving and move them into a true sense of community. And we can't think of anyone better than Seth Ressler of Community Marketing Revolution joining us today to help dive into this topic. He's going to hop on in just a minute. But I want to make sure you've got a couple of updates you need to know about because there's a lot going on. So we got you covered. All right. If you haven't got your 2026 membership, it's not too late. You can still be a part of what CMB is doing this year. And you're like, well, wait a second. I didn't go to Momentum. So is it still a benefit? Absolutely. If you become a gold member, then you can join us at the gold member gathering coming up in August. I'll share more about that in just a minute. But even as a silver member, you're going to get discounted rates for the CMB Summit coming up this year, access to some research projects we're working on, plus every member is contributing back into our community, back into our industry, supporting one another as we're trying to carry out the mission that's in front of us. So if you want more information, if you want to go ahead and get your membership knocked out, you can do exactly what's on your screen. Text the keyword member to 72747. Now, I teased it a second ago, but our gold member gathering is coming up. This is going to be so much fun. Oh my goodness, we're going to be in Washington, D.C., August 26th and 27th, and Mark Batterson is going to be joining us. He's an incredible speaker and teacher. We're going to be diving into some principles that can help not only with personal development and professional development, but also leadership and how you support and empower your team. Going to be at the Museum of the Bible, and there's a lot of other cool things that we can't wait to tell you about. But you do have to be a gold member to attend. So if you haven't got your gold membership, you can. And I want to mention this too, because maybe you're a silver member and you're like, I'd kind of like to go to that. Did you know you can actually upgrade your silver membership to a gold membership? Just reach out to me, John, no H, Jon, at cmbonline.org, and we'll go over the details about how you can make that happen. I hope you'll be able to join us in August. I mentioned Momentum. What an incredible time that was. If you were there, you know what I'm talking about. You might even say it was greater than any other Momentum we've had. We've heard that comment multiple times. And so many people talked about just how powerful the education was that we dove into this year. And that's why Momentum on Demand is such an incredible resource. And so you see on your screen, if you were an attendee, you can purchase Momentum on Demand for only $99. But this year, for the lowest price ever for non-attendees, you can get it for $199. We're talking about access to 15 main stage speakers. Those videos, 16 audio files, from all of our breakouts. We're also going to include speaker resources and handouts, things to help you be able to experience Momentum all over again, or maybe for the first time at your own pace. And you'll have access to that through the end of the year, December 31st. So it's an investment worthwhile. If you want to get information about how you can purchase it, then text that keyword. I will tell you, don't put a space between on demand. It's all one word. On demand, again, the number 72747. I'll send you a link right now so you can go ahead and make your purchase and get that taken care of. Now, speaking of Momentum, we had an incredible time at our keynote, and it was so fun to have Coach Rack of the Savannah Bananas join us. And I just found out we've got an autographed Coach Rack baseball to give away right now. So go ahead, get those fingers warmed up, open up the chat. If you haven't checked in yet to say who you are and where you're checking in from, now's a great time to dive in. All right. So if you can be the first to answer this question, you're going to win the autographed baseball. Okay. So here's what it is. What Major League Baseball team signed Coach Rack to a professional contract? What Major League Baseball team signed Coach Rack to a professional contract? Drop that into the chat. Let's see. Let's see. Uh-oh, I think we've got a winner. I think we've got a winner. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, see, now all y'all are passionate. We got every kind of fan and team included here. But it is my team, the Washington Nationals, and I see Denise Harper put it in first. Congratulations, Denise, on winning that baseball. We'll get it to you shortly. And again, if you haven't checked in yet to say hello, tell us where you're checking in from. please do so in the chat now, because this will also be where you put your questions for a Q&A time at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome onto the screen with me Seth Ressler. Seth, it is always so good to see you. Thank you so much for taking time today to share some of the latest findings you've got.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate you allowing me to be here. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All right. So, hi, everybody. I'm going to take over, and here's what we're talking about today. My name is Seth Ressler, and we are talking about community. From listeners to community, strengthening connection around your Christian radio station. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself in a bit, but before I do, I want to talk to you about a conversation I had with a Christian broadcaster actually just last week. They said something that I thought was really interesting, and I want to use it to frame our conversation today. What they said was, this radio station is my church. It was something that a listener had told them, and something that I'm sure that you have heard from many listeners. Essentially, what the listener was saying is, I don't go to a church in my neighborhood regularly. This radio station is my church, and you can understand why they would feel that way. That they get a lot of the things from their local Christian radio station. A deeper sense of relationship with God, motivation, inspiration, a sense of community. All of that they get from the radio station. And I want to explore this further today. Talk about, can a radio station not replace a church, but serve the same purpose and provide a lot of the same benefits. What we're essentially saying here is, can a radio station provide community to its listeners? We're going to come back to that question in a moment. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I come out of radio. I actually come out of commercial radio, specifically alternative rock radio. I was one of these guys that bopped around the country from market to market to market. I became a PD at WBRU in Providence, and WBRU was a unique station. It was a standalone radio station that was a nonprofit organization. And it existed to serve a mission, not the same mission that your radio station serves. It was designed as an educational workshop for students who wanted to go on to a career in broadcasting. So I very much know what it's like to work for a local radio station, a small company, where the mission is the most important thing. Not necessarily just the revenue or just the ratings, that sometimes you got to make decisions because it's what advances the mission. And I'll tell you a little bit about my first encounter with community. That's actually happened when I wasn't working in the radio industry for a while. I was living in Boston, and I was dating a woman who loved to talk about food. She was a foodie, and she liked to talk about it so much that I finally got to the point where I said, we've got to find somebody, some friends for you to talk to about food, because I can't have this many conversations about food. So I was a digital guy. I knew how to throw up a website, and that's what I did. I built a website. We called it Mystery Meat, MEET. And it was just one page with a registration form on it. And the deal was, we were a group of foodies who would go out to have a dinner at a restaurant. But there was a catch. You wouldn't find out what the restaurant was until 24 hours in advance. So it was a big mystery. And this was unusual for me in that up until that time, everything I had done had been to create content, primarily radio content. And that was always how I got attention. This was not content. There was no blog, no podcast, no YouTube videos. It was just one page where you registered to go to these events. And it got a ton of attention. I got all kinds of press, from the Boston Globe to NPR's food blog to WBUR. And these events sold out like that. And people started showing up. And they were all adventurous foodies, because you've got to be, if you're going to go try a restaurant, you know nothing about it. You've got to be pretty adventurous. And they loved coming to it. And after a while, the same people started showing up month after month after month. And relationships were formed and friendships were formed. And it was just a fantastic event. And I didn't realize it at the time. But I had created a space where people who were all foodies could get together and can build relationships with each other. I had essentially, by accident, built a community. And community is a hot topic in the world of Christian broadcasting lately. Matt Stockman, who I'm sure many of you know, he's over at Pillar Media. He recently wrote a LinkedIn newsletter where he talked about his big takeaways after going to Momentum. And one of those big takeaways was the value of community. Matt wrote, "Just as you and I long for meaningful relationships, so do our listeners. And Christian radio occupies a unique position to help grow those connections. This year, let's be intentional about creating opportunities for community, both within our teams and among our listeners. If your station becomes the catalyst for friendships, encouragement, and lasting relationships, you'll earn a place in people's lives that goes far beyond what comes through their speakers." And I think he's right about that. I think Christian radio in particular has a unique opportunity to do this. It's not just Matt saying this. This was recently posted to LinkedIn by Troy West of K-Love and Air One. And he was talking about the K-Love Music Awards. And he said, quote, "Audiences today aren't just looking for content. They're looking for belonging. The smartest media brands in the future won't simply distribute programming. They'll create experiences where audiences feel seen, known, and emotionally connected to something bigger than themselves." And I think both of these guys are right. I think there's a unique opportunity for Christian radio in particular here. And I think it is about creating spaces where your listeners can connect, not just to the content that you're putting on the air, but to each other. And so I want to talk a little bit today about how to do that. By the way, this is a theme that's not just coming up in Christian radio. It is also coming up in other radio spaces. I have done a lot of work over the years with public radio. And public radio is very similar to Christian radio in that it's nonprofit, it is mission driven. And a couple of years ago, a number of the big public media organizations got together and they did a survey of 30,000 Americans to try and find out what people need from their public radio stations. It was called the Researching Unmet Needs Study. And the number one finding in that study was that there's a powerful craving for community and live local connection. People want to know their local areas better and to connect with other members of their community, not only virtually, but live and in person. So this is an opportunity that is there for any and all radio stations that want to step up to the plate and meet this challenge. And I think Christian radio is uniquely positioned to do so. So let's talk about how you actually do that. And I want to return to this idea of, the radio station as a church. Can a radio station, serve in a lot of ways the same purpose as a church when it comes to the idea of community? Well, the answer is maybe it can. I mean, the answer is yes, it can, but it needs to do certain things, because here's what a church is. By the way, when I say church here, I am not using it in the institutional sense. I'm talking about that building in your neighborhood that people go to on Sunday mornings for Mass. And that building is a space. A church is a space where people connect. They not only connect to God, but they also connect to each other. And that's really important, because if a radio station is to do that, it needs to create the conditions under which its listeners can connect to each other. To build community, you must create a space for people to connect. And here's the key, and this is really important. You cannot create a space with content alone. It's going to take more than just the music and the disc jockeys and the personalities that you put on your airwaves. You've got to create a space. And I've been fascinated by this concept, and I've been spending the last couple of years delving into community, reading all the books about community. I've interviewed a number of the big thought leaders in the space, and in that time, I have learned a lot. And I want to share with you today 3 insights from all of that about community building. And we're going to start with insight number 1. The rules for community building are different from audience building. And that starts by recognizing this thing. And if there's one thing you take away from today's webinar, I hope it's this. An audience is not a community. They are not the same thing. I work in a lot of spaces where people want to use these two words interchangeably because community sounds nice. But if you have a radio station and people listen to that radio station, doesn't mean you have a community. It means you have an audience. I have a podcast. It is called Community Case Studies. And on that podcast, I interview people who are actually doing the work of building communities. They're actually community organizers. They are creating spaces where people gather. This is Megan Mahaffey. She was a recent guest. She is the woman who organizes Art Girl, which is people in New York City who want to get together to do art. Not professionally, not because it's their job, but just because they like doing art. It's a creative outlet for them. And Megan talked to me about the difference between an audience and a community. So she talks about the difference, and I want to talk a little bit about the difference between an audience and a community. You
Hey,
all
Seth.
know.
Hey,
Yeah,
Seth. Real quick,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure that that audio came through. Do you mind?
Oh, did it not?
I don't think so. I don't know if it's
Uh,
possible. Maybe share that again.
yeah, you know what? I will tell you. I will summarize because I don't know if the yeah. It looks like a number of people who couldn't get through. She basically said, look, if you have a social media following, that's not the same thing as a community. That's an audience. Those are people who are following you. That it's not until there's a two-way street, not just between you and the creator, but between the people who are actually consuming the content. Um, that's when it becomes a community. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the difference between how you build an audience and how you build community. You all know how to build an audience. You create content, and if that content is compelling, audience members will find it. On the other hand, when you set out to build a community, you are, as we've said, building a space. And the community members will gather in that space. And the difference here is that your audience members, by and large, don't interact with each other. They certainly don't have meaningful relationships with each other. But in a community, they do. In fact, that's the whole point. That's what makes a community different. And so when we look at an audience, the primary relationship is between the content creator and the fans. In this case, between your relationship and your listeners. On the other hand, when you set out to build a community, you are creating that space, you are inviting people into that space, and the primary relationship is between the members of your community in that space. And there are different tools for building an audience than there are for creating spaces for a community. When I started in this industry 30 years ago, if you wanted to create content and get it out to the masses, you needed a radio tower, a television studio, a printing press. Those were all publishing tools. Now we have the digital equivalent of those publishing tools, whether it's WordPress or YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, so on and so forth. But the tools that you use to build spaces are different. Digital spaces are built on Zoom or Slack, or things like Discord or Circle or Mighty Networks. These allow people to come together and connect with each other, not just consume content. And very few platforms do both. Facebook is actually one of the few that does. The Facebook feed is a publishing tool. Facebook groups is a space building tool. And in an interesting development, it was just about a week ago that Facebook very quietly introduced a new app that actually separates groups out from the rest of Facebook. And so people can just use it for their groups. And I think that was a recognition of this distinction that I'm pointing out here, that there's a difference between publishing and space building. So what do we actually mean when we say community? Well, here's the definition that I like to use. A community is a group of people who share a mission and mutual concern for one another. And I want to focus in on that shared mission. Technically, this is a type of community. This is what we call a community of practice. I like to think about the shared mission that's bringing people together as this. Here's the formula for writing a shared mission statement. We bring together who to do what so that they can achieve what. This is the who, the what, and the why. And I'll give you some examples of that. Let's actually go back to that local church. They might describe their shared mission statement this way. We bring together local Christians to worship so that we can deepen our relationship with God. I'll give you an example of another community, CMB, who might, describe their mission as this. We bring together Christian music broadcasters to learn from and support each other so that we can amplify our impact. I was going to share another statement with you, but apparently the audio is not working, so we will skip past that. Here's the key point. The rules for creating a space are different than the rules for creating content. And in fact, much of what you've learned about building an audience works really well when that's what you're setting out to do, but actually doesn't work well when you are setting out to build a community. I don't have time in this webinar to go through all of the ways that the rules are different. Here is just a sample. But again, when you're setting out to build a community because you're doing something different, you've got to follow a different set of rules. Arguably the most important are the last two here. With an audience, people come back over and over again for the content. And when the content runs out, they stop coming back. But with a community, they are coming back for their connection with the other people in the space. That's what keeps them coming back over and over again. And that's going to lead me into insight number 2. Insight number 2 is this. Community doesn't require you to be the engine. Because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking to yourselves, oh, this sounds great, but I got a lot to do already. It's everything I can do to get the music log up and out the door or to get today's morning show on the air. I don't have time to do something on top of this. Community is different from producing content in that when you set out to build content, you are the engine. You are the driver. You've got to get up every day and do that radio show. You've got to pump out that music log every single day. But when you set out to build community, what you're really doing is you are creating a container. And yes, it takes work to set up your space, to set up your container. But there's something that starts to happen after a while, which is that the other members in the community start to step up and they start to contribute. And if you could hear this absolutely brilliant quote from Carrie Melissa Jones, who is the author of one of my favorite books on community building called Building Brand Communities, she would tell you that there's something magical when these folks start to step up and contribute, and that it's not you asking them for a favor. It's something that they want to do, and it's a gift when you allow them to participate. I'll give you an example of this. There's a conference called Podcast Movement. It is for podcasters, and it started, about 12 years ago at this point. And as a radio consultant, I went out to the second Podcast Movement conference that there was, and I came back completely floored by what I saw, by the members of this community they were all podcasters getting together to learn from each other to become better podcasters. And I was working for Jacobs Media at the time, and I said, I want to bring radio broadcasters into this community. And so I went to the organizers of Podcast Movement, there's Dan Franks there on the left, and said, hey, we want to bring radio broadcasters out. And we did. And then the following year, we stepped up above and beyond that. And we actually created a track called Broadcasters Meet Podcasters. And we went out of our way to really bring radio broadcasters into this podcasting space because we love the community so much that we wanted other people that we know to be part of this community. We didn't get paid to do any of this. We did this, we stepped up, and we volunteered because we wanted to give back to the community. And that's what I mean when I say that with a community, you are not the engine. You are building a container and other people will step up. And of course, if you've spent a lot of time in a church, you know that you've seen this principle in action as well. Because yes, there may be a priest or a pastor who is running things on a day-to-day basis, but churches really live on the voluntary contributions of their members who step up and participate and do things. So that's one of the beauties of being in a community. And so that's going to lead me to insight number 3. And insight number 3 is this: you're closer to community than you think. And here's what I mean by that. You've already got all of the raw materials to start building community from your audience. First of all, you have an audience, which is really important when starting out. And so now what you want to do is you want to find a subset of your audience with a shared mission. The first community that you can build, and you probably have multiple communities within your audience, but the first community that you're going to build is a subset of your audience. It's not going to be the entire audience. You're going to find some small group of people that have something in particular in common and a desire to connect with other people who share that mission. I'll give you an example, and I'll bring it back to Matt Stockman and the conversation that we had a while back. Matt, over there at Pillar Media, has a signature event that they do every year. It is a daddy-daughter dance, and it's one of their most successful events, and it only happens once a year. And the question became, is there interest in these fathers of daughters connecting with each other? And I will tell you, as somebody with a 13-year-old girl in my life, boy, when she got her first cell phone and the problems that ensued, what I would not have given to talk to another father who had been through those issues and knew how to deal with it. It would have been really valuable to me to have been able to connect to other people. By the same token, I'm sure it's valuable for those daughters to connect with one another. So they could take the signature event that they already have and build a space around it where people could interact year round. You probably have the same sort of raw materials there. And so if you're thinking about, well, what kind of community would I build? Here's my suggestion for how to think about it. Start with your audience. And we know it's going to be some subset of your audience, but start there. Maybe look at your clients or your sponsors and what they are interested in, and then take inventory of your station. And in particular, look at the events that your station already does. Look at the shows that you may already have on the air, if you have any specialty shows or any shows with a particular focus. And then look at your staff and what they're interested in. Do you have somebody on the staff who's really into pets or really into wine or has young kids at home and wants to talk to other parents of young kids, or a first-time mother who wants to talk to other first-time mothers? And look at that intersection, and that's where I think you have an opportunity to build a community, is in the places where that overlaps. You could take a subset of your audience there and build a community, build a space for people around a shared mission. Now, of course, the natural inclination when you first set out to build that space is to turn to events. I know this as somebody who comes from music radio myself. Always, we're like, oh, we'll throw a concert. I do want to say this about events. Events are a space that brings people together, but not all events build community. Some events are designed to build audience. And if you want to know the difference between the two, a good rule of thumb is to look at the chairs. If the seats are pointed all in one direction, if they're pointed towards, for example, a stage or a screen, chances are you're building audience. For example, if there's a movie in a movie theater, that is designed to get that movie in front of as many people as possible, is designed for an audience. And you are literally told at the start of the movie, don't you dare turn to the guy next to you and start talking. We will throw you out if you do that. Movies are not designed to build community. On the other hand, if you look at the chairs and the chairs are pointed at each other, for example, they're in a circle around a coffee table or a campfire, then chances are your event is designed to build community, is designed to build relationships between the people that you have gathered in that space. And you can have events that do both. You can have a conference like Momentum where sometimes there are speakers or a panel on stage, and at that point, it's about an audience. And then there are portions of the event where, whether they be dinners or breakfasts or breakout sessions or other types of things, roundtable discussions, where the chairs are pointed at each other, and it is designed to build community. This is an example of what I mean when I say the rules for building community are different than the rules for building an audience. So there are the three insights. Once again, the rules for community building are different from audience building. Number two, community doesn't require you to be the engine. You're building a container, and it will take on a life of its own as your community members step up. And you're closer to community than you think. You have everything there. So if we come back to the question I posed at the beginning of this, can your radio station, build community the way that local churches build community? The answer is yes, if the radio station builds spaces. So the question before you is, what are your spaces going to look like? Who are you bringing together? What are they going to do in those spaces? What's actually going to happen there? Of course, we can't answer that all today, but I have created something to help you answer that question. This is a 5-day challenge. I run it a couple of times a year. I'm running it again in a week and a half on June 22nd, and it's called the Create Your Community Roadmap Challenge. And in this challenge, basically, it's not to try and convince you that you should do community. It is to help you decide whether building a community makes sense for your organization. Is this the right strategy for you? So if you want to stop talking about community in an abstract sense, and if you want to do like Matt Stockman said and make this the year that you actually build community, this is your opportunity to sit down and to really ask, okay, if we did this, what would it look like? Who would we be bringing together? What would happen when we bring them together? Is there a revenue opportunity here? How does it serve our overall mission? And most importantly, is community building right for us? And if you want to make this the point at which you get serious about this and really make a decision about whether community building is right for your organization and your future, I would love to have you join us. Again, it's a free 5-day challenge. I only run it a couple of times per year. You can go to communityroadmapchallenge.com and get all the details and register, or you can just scan that QR code. But I would love to have you there to help you think through what community building could look like for your organization. And so with that, thank you very much for having me here today. John.
That's such good stuff, man. Thank you not only for taking the time to walk us through it, but I know there's a lot of prep work that goes into that. So we appreciate you investing back into all of our participants here today. So just know how grateful we are for you. And again, if you do have a question, we're going to have a few minutes now just to be able to dive into as many of those as we can for the next few minutes. Excuse me. You can drop those in the chat function, and we'll keep an eye on those and make sure to take a look. Seth, one thing that you made some great references to some folks who had some really powerful thoughts on what it looks like to build authentic community from an audience. Do you have any examples of maybe some stations specifically that you're seeing really they're creating those spaces you were talking about and they're doing it well?
Yeah, it's early. I mean, you're seeing this more in other industries than you are necessarily in radio. But some of the examples that I have come from public radio. So I was going to play a clip for you from Grace Weber, and Grace Weber is associated with the public radio station in Milwaukee, and Grace Weber. Grace Weber's a musician, an award-winning musician from Milwaukee, and she wanted to create a space for teenagers who are considering a career in the music industry. Mm. And so they put together these monthly events where people who are, let's call them music career curious, can get together and they can not only see panel discussions and meet other people, but also meet other people who are pursuing that. And it's been a really successful program. So that's an example of something that you're seeing. I get this question a lot, so I actually created a podcast called Community Case Studies, specifically to look at how different people are using these community building principles, which are universal, and applying them in different specific situations. And everything from a conference of museum curators to run clubs to there's a couple of public radio examples in there to podcasters. You see a lot of it, but that's where I would suggest people go is look up community case studies and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and you'll find all sorts of different examples of how people are doing this.
Love that. What a great resource too, because you, like you said, you've done enough of these. You know that typically comes up in the questions. I'm curious. You touched on this some, but I wonder if maybe you could expound on it a little more. One of the things that I think, and you know this all too well, that radio stations are facing are how do we continue to build an audience that hopefully turns into a community, especially with younger generations? Like,
Yeah.
what are you finding as you have been exploring this community building topic? How important is that, especially if we want to bring in new listeners who maybe don't think the radio is their first place to go and listen to music?
Yeah, I think the media landscape is changing in a way that I mean, when I started 30 years ago, if you wanted to create content and distribute it out to the masses, you
Yeah.
needed a radio tower, a television studio, a printing press. I literally moved across country and went to college. I grew up in California. I went to college in Rhode Island. And the reason I chose that college was because I knew I wanted to work in radio. And they had a radio station. That's the only way I could access it. That radio station shut down now because they could not recruit enough students to come in and work for it because all the students were like, you know what, I got a cell phone in my back pocket and I can create content and publish it on YouTube anytime I want. Why do I need to go do an overnight shift for a semester before you let me on the radio? Um, the bottom line is the content creation tools have gotten cheaper and easier to use and more accessible. And this is before we even start talking about AI creating content. It is
Mm.
harder and harder and harder than ever to cut through the noise. And everybody's facing this challenge, not just radio broadcasters. Everybody's trying to figure out how do I grow my audience. And I think one of the things that really attracted me to community is that it's about depth, not width, not breadth, not size. In other words, how do we build deeper relationships with a smaller group of people, and frankly, generate sustainable revenue from them rather than trying to always grow out and get
Mm.
more people. I talked about some of the differences between community building and audience building. One of the differences is in audience building, more is always better. You always want it to be bigger.
Yeah.
In community building, that's not the case. In community building, you want the right people in the room, not the most people in the room.
Yeah.
And, there are examples of that. If there were a community of Harley Davidson motorcycle riders, right? And I showed up to be part of it, yes, the group would be bigger. The group would not be better because of it. Because I don't ride a motorcycle. It's not my thing. It's not what I do. And I'm just going to slow the group down, and everybody's going to be annoyed with me. If you've ever been in a yoga class and somebody brings their 8-year-old and says you sit in the back of the room with your Nintendo Switch, it throws off the whole vibe.
Right.
You want the right people in the room, not the most people in the room, and that's different. So, the short answer is, stop trying to reach the most people. Start trying to bring together the right people and deepening that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So really good. That's really good. We've had a couple of questions come in, so we'll try to get through a couple of these before we wrap up. What about community building in the donor space, Seth? How can we create something where it's almost a tribal feeling of our closest supporters already?
Yeah, so I always start with what's the shared mission. And there may be a couple of questions in here, so I'm let me, if I'm not going on the right track, say something and
Okay.
let me get it. So the question is, do we want to bring the donors together so that the donors connect with each other?
Yeah.
Or is the question about how do you monetize community if you bring your members together?
Yeah. I think so. Specifically asking community building in that donor space. So I wonder if it's certainly, I'm sure it will have an impact on the revenue side, but I do wonder if it's more about how do you build a sense of community among your donors, really creating that space where they can feel like they can connect with each other.
Yeah. So, I think the first thing is dialing in that shared mission. do these donors want to connect with each other? If they do, why? What are they doing in that space? What's the value that they're getting out of it? It may be possible that they do. It may be that they don't. And really, you've got to ask them and find out. I don't know if the guy, if some guy writing really big checks wants to connect with other people who are writing really big checks, or if you've got smaller donors who are, monthly subscription or something like that, do they want to connect with each other, and why? It's possible they want to get in the room because they want to see the impact that their donations are making, and so you bring them into the space that you're building, and it creates a sense of affiliation. I mean, one of the rules that's different between audience building and community building is that when you are building an audience, there's this notion of if you build it, they will come. And so you go to New Zealand for a couple of years and you film a couple of movies about hobbits, and then you go, here's the movie, it's done. You go to the Overlook Hotel and you write your great American novel and you publish it and it's done. That's not how you build a community. You are building a space with your members, not for your members. And so it's very much a matter of experimentation, of trying something, getting feedback early, seeing what works, and adjusting. And so you start by getting those donors together and go, do you want to connect with other donors? And if so, why? What would the value be that you would get out of it? And then you figure out how to create a space where they can do that. Or do those donors want to create with other, just listeners in general and bring them together? If that shared mission isn't there, if they don't have a reason to come into your space, then they're not going to. So you start there, if that makes sense.
It's good. It's good. Our next question. I have a lot of Facebook followers that I want to turn into community so I can direct them back to radio. Other than comments and replies, how can I build community better there?
Yeah, so we're mixing a couple of things here. I mean, the Facebook followers are an audience. For them to be community, you've got to create a space where they can come together. But you don't create a community to then turn them back into an audience, right? I mean, it almost sounds like I've got a Facebook following that's an audience. I want to turn them into a community so that I can turn that community back into an audience for my radio station. The answer is I don't think that works. You don't build a community because you want to get more people to listen to your radio station. I think you build a community because you have a group of people that want to connect with each other. So I would start that. I mean, Facebook does have tools. You can take your Facebook audience and invite them into a group, and the group can be something. WXPN, for example, which is the public radio station in Philadelphia, they have a specialty show that is 80s new wave, Depeche Mode and Erasure and all that kind of music. And they started a Facebook group around it. And there's a real community that formed there. What happens in that community is that those fans of that music style talk to each other. And they get really deep on it. I mean, they'll sit there and talk about, the soft cell B-side record, blah, 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 when it came out on vinyl. But that's for them. You know what I mean? And do they probably listen to the show a lot more? Yeah. Are they probably more passionate about it? Yeah. But are you consciously going into that group and, putting out promotional messages about the show? No, that's not really what it's about, if that makes sense.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good. Well, Seth, I wish we had more time, but we're running up against the clock here, so we're going to need to wrap up. But thank you so much again for taking the time to walk us through this. I know it's something that every radio station is addressing, and you've given us a lot to think about, and I appreciate just all of your investment in our folks today.
Well, thank you for having me very much. And if anybody wants to know more, they can email me, Seth@communitymarketingrevolution.com. And really the best thing, if you really want to think through and answer all these questions, I mean, we're doing this again on June 22nd. It's a Community Roadmap Challenge. And it's to answer this, hey, if we had a community, what would it look like? And what would that actually mean? And what would I have to do? And would it all even be worth it? You're invited to come join for that.
Love that. Love that. Well, Seth, again, thank you. And also want to say thank you as well to you for joining us today for the webinar. Again, if you want to learn more about other resources, upcoming events for CMB, you can check it out at cmbonline.org. Go ahead and mark your calendar too. Our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, August 12th. We'd love to have you at noon Central Time then again. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.